Welcome back to Sermons at New Wine. This is the third installment of Story Gifts, Passion, and Purpose. This week we're going to look at passion. So, my name is Eric Abramson. I get to be the pastor here at New Wine. Thanks for dropping in to listen to this sermon, this word. I hope there's some good words here for you. If you want to join us in person, know that we meet every Sunday at 4 p.m. at 484 Water Street. So many fours, in like old downtown Main Street, Newmarket, beautiful part of town. We're the church right at the end of Main Street, and we share space with St. Andrew's Presbyterian. They are a good partner in ministry. You can find us in that smaller chapel off to the side if you join us. Otherwise, hey, it's good to be here with you. Well, this week, like I said, we're going to talk about passion, and we are looking in this series of story, gifts, passion, purpose. And I'll say it again, this is not a sermon series that is a formula for you and your life and how you're going to find your one purpose in all of life, right? Because we just acknowledge that there are seasons of life, and there are our story. Honestly, like it's ongoing, and so our gifts continue to develop, and passions and purpose will look differently as we continue to live. So we live into this dual question that we continue to ask ourselves at New Wine. We ask, what is God doing? And what am I doing about it? So what is God up to in the world around me? Right? And how am I responding? So today I want to start with this familiar story, I think to many of you, and then get into a little personal story involving my family. So you know the story of David and Goliath, right? And so as a refresher, Goliath is this fellow who is apparently 9 feet tall, 9 inches. Um, Unbelievable. It said his chest plate of armor, his chest plate alone is 125 pounds. Um, anyway, so he has there's this whole deal in the Old Testament where he and his people, the Philistines, are challenging Israel, and they have this challenge going for about 40 days. The Bible loves 40 days so much, but here's what they want. They want to take Israel over. And what the Philistines have is this great big giant, and they're like, "Hey, here's how we want to fight. We're going to fight hand to hand combat. And if anybody wants to fight, they have to fight our guy Goliath." And so to paint the picture even further, there's this valley in between these two hills, and on one side you have the Philistines, and on the other side you have Israel. And Goliath would go into the valley every day, and he would shout out to the Israelites and call them names and be like, "Who's gonna fight me?" And like obviously nobody. Uh, like like wrestle you? No, no thanks. Um, so anyway, so there's all these people, all these Israelites, there's all these guys who've been drafted to stand up for Israel and do this battle, but nobody's going. And there's this kid. His name is David, and he's the youngest boy of eight. There's eight brothers, and he shows up to the battlefield every day to like deliver like food like from his father to his brothers, and then just obviously like check in on them and report like, well, what did you see today? Like, oh, nothing. The guy's still challenging, and nobody's doing anything. So another thing about David is that he is a shepherd, so he helps his family by watching over the sheep that they look after, and there's more to that in just a minute. Um, and so, he goes a couple days to the battleground, and he's like, seriously, guys, like, is nobody going to fight this guy? And which is like big talk from a little guy. And then he offers to fight. Okay, so he offers to fight this giant. And he's obviously denied it first because they're like, well, we don't want to see you die. But then he makes his case, and impressively, like the guys listen. So he makes his case about like his own story and his gifts, and he's like, look, I'm a shepherd, and I look after these sheep all the time. And I have this sling, and I protect my sheep, and I have killed lions, and I've killed bears, right? Like when they get too close or they threaten my flock, I can put a stone in this sling, and I can be far away, and I can whip this thing up to like 90 miles an hour. He didn't use that language, but for us, he can whip this thing like a pitcher's speed of a rock. And if it strikes the head of an animal, that animal is definitely going down. So Saul, who's king at the time, invites David in, and he's like, "Look, buddy, we're gonna at least give you some armor, like because we don't want you getting smashed." And so Saul gives him armor and a helmet and this sword, but everything's too big, right? Because he's a child, and none of it fits. It's all too heavy, and he's like, I can't even move, right? And so these things representative of like they are not his story. They are not his gifts. They are not what he should be dressed in, right? They don't fit for him, right? And how often do we see people leading outside of their gifting, right? It does not tend to go well. He says, forget this armor business. Let me go down to the creek and get 5 stones, right? Then I can recognize that I can put in my slingshot satchel or whatever, and then I'll go down to battle. Right? So then, as the story goes, if you know the story, he goes out and he does what he does best. Right? Goliath calls him out, laughs at this kid, obviously, and but David, he with his story and his gifts, his gifting of slingshot, and his passion to see his people saved, right, and no longer mistreated. His passion for his people brings him down to this valley, faces this moment, this giant, and in this moment comes to fruition all of his gifting, right? In this instance, and it says he just takes 1 stone. He had 5. The first one, crack shot, whips it, hits Goliath square in the forehead, right? And Goliath is knocked out. And he goes over and chops his head off with Goliath's sword. It's brutal. But there's this opportunity for him, and he took it. And so we understand passion often as excitement and as zeal and as enthusiasm, and honestly what we see in a lot of like younger people, right? They just have this zest of life. And for David, there was something awakened in him, right? And he responded. And in this moment, this spark, this flame, this desire and a drive took over for David. So passion is also what we suffer for, right? It's what we strive for, and it's what we're willing to put a large amount of energy and time into. But this was just a moment, right? And passion can die down and wear out. Right? Passion alone, especially based on just a moment or moments of high dopamine, right? They can end quickly after. And it can certainly die down if only the individual is involved. And our passion cannot come just from us. It needs to be shared, and shared with God's heart. When passion is housed in who God is, what God is calling us to, and who God is calling us to, it transforms passion into its like fuller state. So if passion is to suffer, compassion is to suffer with. When our passion is housed in the heart of God, it burns brighter and longer and bigger. It burns brighter because we see and know the heart of God and the grace and the love of God. And when the love of God is truly at work within us, compassion is the natural result. Well, years ago, my uncle had retired from work. He and my aunt bought this little cozy cottage on a lake, and they loved it so much they ended up renovating it, and then they moved up there and it made it into a home. But within a year, he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and he lived with this deteriorating disease for 5 years. And for those of you who know and have experienced walking with somebody with this disease, it's terrible, right? It's awful. It is such a um, depressing disease. You just watch this person fade. So right at about this time, my aunt had returned to school to become a teacher and get her master's, and she was working for a little while doing like second careering. She's done so many things, and she was trying to like get this kind of career launch for her again, and my uncle was going into these daytime care programs, and they went well for a time, but then they proved in the end unhelpful and honestly at times unsafe. So she ended up keeping him home, and she became his full-time caregiver. She cared for him as she watched the disease progress. And she learned a lot about Alzheimer's and caregiving and the process and the function and the heart of it all and the struggle. And she struggled with these care programs and wished that they could be better, right, and more heart-centered and more personal and just honestly more helpful for people like residents and for families. So after 5 years with this disease, it took my uncle's life, and he went home to Jesus. And as much as we rejoice in his new life in Christ in heaven, it was heart-wrenching. Right? He was too young. He was 67. But my aunt is someone who is honestly and genuinely a person of hope. And she knew that physical death was not the end, and her hope is in Jesus, the ultimate healer. Now, many of you know this from experience, and a lot of you know this from hearing about it, but caregiving is not easy. Right? Caregiving for adults with Alzheimer's is not simple. And in his death, amidst the grief, there was also relief. Right? He was made perfect now, healed and renewed in the presence of God. And there was relief too. The hard work of 24/7 caregiving had come to an end. It's bittersweet. But for her, there was also now this renewed sense of passion. This passion for heart-centered care for those living with Alzheimer's and dementia. A passion for supporting caregivers, and a desire to see the system work better and support more people. She had suffered with him for years. She had seen the very real and ugly side of this disease and knew firsthand what it was like. Her understanding and empathy had grown through her experience. This was now her story. And along the way, she developed insight and gifts that led her to her next chapter in life. So at first, she took a job working for Alzheimer's Association, which is the huge, like big umbrella, big fundraising part of Alzheimer's. And she got to work raising awareness and support, and loved being part of some incredibly meaningful work. But she had always kind of wanted something a little bit more personal, a bit more like ground level, grassroots. She wanted less 3,000 feet in the air and more boots on the ground. So she ends up getting a job as the executive director for this care home. It's called Rachma, which is Aramaic for unconditional love, right? How cool is that? At the time it was 3 homes, like homes in a neighborhood of about 10 to 15 residents. So she becomes executive director. And under her leadership, it grew and expanded, and it changed. She was able to change from the inside how their care was done. right? Because she had lived experience. She shared that with others, with people who worked in caregiving and those who worked in the planning and the organization. And she brought her heart and her passion to see this go differently for residents and family members. She creates this comprehensive and holistic care environment for residents and families. And then by the end of her time, they were able to add a fourth home. Like, her story shaped her gifts and her heart, and it led to new passion. And because of this passion, this suffering was suffering that she did with, right? And her heart and her understanding grew. Out of this compassion, she was able to invest and build an environment of care and compassion that supported more people living with Alzheimer's and dementia and their families. Now, she has since left this job and started her own small, like, home care, where she operates and lives in it, giving care to 4 to 5 women at a time who are living with memory loss at various stages. Right. So, what I'm saying is, from this tragedy comes all of this love and life and care and change, because she suffered with. As we continue to live out our story and develop our gifts, we pray that the passion of God, the compassion of God will be at work within us so that we can begin and continue to live this purposeful life. In my aunt's case, her passion for working in this industry started in her 50s. And maybe you've found what you're passionate about. Maybe you've found a couple of things, but maybe you're unsure and, like, you're still wondering. But the truth is, as wonderful of a story that it is, the story isn't always as big as this, and that's okay. I don't share this story to set the example. I share it because I've seen it and I know it and it's good. The other truth is, God is always trying to get our attention to see with compassion. So let me read this story from Luke 10. On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he asked, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" "What is written in the law?" Jesus replied. "How do you read it?" The man answered, "Well, love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all of your mind. And love your neighbor as yourself." "You have answered correctly," Jesus replied. "Do this, and you will live." But he wanted to justify himself, so he asked Jesus, "Well, who is my neighbor?" Right, so we know this story. And if you don't, it goes like this. A man was walking along the road when he was overtaken by these robbers, these thugs, these guys who wanted his money. And so they took his money and they beat him till he was almost dead. And they left him. And as he's lying there, moments later, a priest walks by. And the priest crosses over on the other side of the road as he approaches the man, so as not to become unclean. And then after he passes by, another man walks up to this man who had been beaten, and he is a Levite, right? So he also walks up to the man, sees that this man is who appears to be dead. So he crosses over to the other side of the road as well, so that he can remain clean. And then this third man shows up. This third man shows up, and he is a Samaritan. He is the other. He is the enemy. He is who, in all the things we don't like and that are wrong with the world. That's how these people understood this story. And Jesus continues telling this story about this Samaritan who has this donkey, and he stops when he sees this man, and he gets up off of his donkey, and he sees this man, and he gives him care immediately. And he pours oil on his wounds and wine, and gives him water, and helps really kind of like revive this man to life. The man was ready to help. The man was prepared to serve with compassion as he went along his way. He had all these things ready for who he might come across. So he puts him on the donkey, and then they go together to the nearest town. And the Samaritan drops this man off at this inn, at this hotel, and he says, "Hey, give this man care, give this man a room, give this man food, give him whatever he needs. Here's a down payment, and then I'm going to come back in short time, and whatever I owe, I'll pay then. But whatever he needs to do to survive and to live, make sure it happens." And it's at the end of this parable, Jesus asks the group, it's like, well, who is the neighbor? And then they say, the one who had compassion. This is a parable, and we don't know the Samaritan's whole story or gifts, right? It's a story Jesus told. But we know that he was othered, and he ends up being the protagonist. He not only employs compassion, he lives it. He is prepared to be compassionate. In this story, there's no wondering in him about whether or not he should stop. Right? Without hesitation, he stops and cares for, loves, and suffers with the one who is wounded. He loves out of the greatest commandment simply with his life, not his job, his life. This is simply who the man is. This is his story. He is the gift. Don't forget that at the end, Jesus says, do this, live this way, and you will live. This is how we live into the life God has for us. By living lives of compassion, living lives for the sake of others. So let me ask you, who are you suffering for and with? Who has God placed on your heart? If you're unsure, I want to invite you to simply begin paying attention to who and what God is doing and who God is bringing in your life. Grace and peace, friends.